Hello and welcome back to the AHPs and Quality Improvement Podcast, where we are creating a community around AHPs working to improve healthcare. I'm Jo Kitchen, the host of this podcast and network facilitator. For more information about our network, follow us on LinkedIn or join the QI community, and we'll have the links in the show notes. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Anne Hill. I will let her introduce herself in a moment, but what I did just want to start off with was a quick story. I told my colleague that Anne was coming on the podcast, and she immediately remembered. Sorry to embarrass you straight off here, Anne, but this is a lovely, positive story. And she told me about a time that their trust had really been struggling with the flow in A&E, which was having a huge effect on ambulance waiting time. So it's really critical safety stuff. Staff were really stressed. They were really overwhelmed. They'd had so many changes. They'd come back into work and the rooms were completely changed around for different purposes, and so people were starting to be lose their kindness towards each other, and there were changes in behaviour that were quite difficult to deal with, and people were becoming resistant to more change. And Anne came in to help with that situation and was really able to calmly unpick all the human elements that were going on in this situation, understand how the staff were overwhelmed with the change as well as demand and the effect this was having on morale. And she was able to support the quality improvement team to work with staff, to understand what was happening, to understand what it felt like to be there, and work with them to make some changes. And I'm sure there are a range of changes, but one of the changes that was able to happen was that staff wanted the equipment ready for them to use when they needed it. And so they created a system where they took photos of what should be in certain trays. And do you know what? It's still in place today. So your effects coming in, I'm sure had a lovely effect on the staff as well. And some of the practical elements of these changes still being useful and still working today. So that's really fantastic to hear about that lasting change. So that's a little bit of background from my perspective. And would you mind introducing yourself and your background for our listeners?
Oh, thank you, Jo. That's so lovely to hear. Hello, everyone. I'm Anne Hill and I'm an executive and leadership coach, and I work now primarily with women on personal professional transformation. I have got a particular interest around menopause as well, so I've trained as an organisational menopause coach, so I weave that into my coaching. But it's my background that's got me here. I started life as a biomedical scientist because I very weirdly had an interest in tuberculosis, and that's how I got into quality improvement. I got to, because nobody else is interested in tuberculosis, so I got to merge 5 of the microbiology services in Birmingham into one lab. And before I knew what I was doing, before anybody else knew what was happening and what we'd accidentally stumbled into, we'd basically created flow in that part of microbiology. And that's led me to, I've headed up QI in 2 NHS trusts. I've led a national programme. I've led at regional level. I've done some work in consultancy as well. And I do a lot of volunteer work, taking those QI skills to wherever they fit in life, because I see this as much wider than life. And if there's a methodology out there, I will do my best to understand and learn from it, to be able to take what's great, to share, to translate it into language that works for us all. There's some fairly technical language. All those Japanese words, which, aren't very popular with some people, absolutely popular with others. You've got to make them fit. So I just think QI is an absolute joy, and it's something for life.
Yeah, I think that's really true, because my background in physiotherapy, and I think of QI as maybe something for specific projects, but actually it's so much more than that. A way of being, a way of approaching different situations and different opportunities in life as we go along. Yeah. There's classic sort of definitions of QI along the lines of it's about quality, about providing safe, effective, positive experiences, and making improvement that lasts long term with a whole system approach and improvement culture. I was wondering, with your experience, do you have any opinions on this definition? Would you change the emphasis at all, or do you feel there's anything missing? Because it's quite a clinical approach to quality improvement.
I totally agree with the ambition and agree with the words in it. But in true hearts and minds and what engages people, does it resonate? Does it resonate for a finance team, for somebody at the front line in A&E on a Saturday night? You know, I've certainly been there, and the last thing you'd be thinking about is a definition that sounds and feels like that. So I think there's a real gap here, and I don't know what the answer is, but now you've made me start to think about it. And, you know, maybe it's something the audience have thought about. What is the one sentence that describes this in a nutshell as how we become that? So that's a fantastic ambition. But actually, how do you be that in every moment as part of your career? That's the gap, I think. You know, if we want a kind world, be kind. If we want safe care, what's the equivalent in each of our practices? So I think there is a real need to translate that into something that resonates every minute, every second of our beings in our work.
Yeah, often people go into a healthcare career because they are caring people, aren't they? They want to provide this comfort, that support. So that's the starting ambition of many people working in healthcare. But then what's the process that translates that into reality on a day-to-day basis? Like you say, we know we want to be safe, but how are we ensuring that we manage that all of the time, and also in a way that values the people working in healthcare? So it's not more tick boxes, more pressure, but it is that way of being that empowers everyone to be able to make changes they think that are important, and also, yeah, I think it's coming back to the kindness, isn't it? Having kindness to ourselves and kindness to each other as we're working together in teams. I think that's when I'm going to take a mull over. What is the sort of one sentence that actually has meaning on a Friday evening in A&E? That, yeah, we've definitely got a gap between the sort of technical approaches to QI and then the in the trenches. What do we do with this situation?
I remember being an on-call, so I was the on-call manager. I think it was Saturday night actually, and it wasn't even late. It was about 8 o'clock in the evening, and corridor was full, majors was full. We were looking at where were we going to go next? Theatre recovery was going to be one of the options. And I'm in the corridor and I watched this little old lady, and she reminded me of my grandmother. She was waiting for care, and she was very confused. She was trying to get off her trolley. And one, it made me weep after. But in that moment, the instinct had to be for all of us, how do we make this less unsafe? So the dilemma is not how do we make this safe, it's how do we just reduce risk. And I think as QI practitioners, anyone with interest in QI, if we can bridge that gap, that feels like when we may well have cracked it.
Yeah, it's quite a pragmatic approach to working in the situations that we find ourselves, rather than wishing things to be completely different. But in that moment, what could be done to help there? That's very true.
Can I just say one thing on that? Because I think it may well be important. So I stepped away. I did what I had to do. I stepped away and I literally cried in that situation. And there was a bit of me that thought, oh my goodness, the A&E team are going to think I'm just weak. I can't hack it. I can't do it. But that moment of humanity and vulnerability, because you shouldn't show your vulnerability if you're the on-call manager, was something that forever bonded with the rest of the team, because it allowed other people to express their emotion too. And sometimes that can feel really difficult. Now, I wouldn't advocate it in every situation, but in that moment it had an impact for us all.
Thanks for sharing that, Anne. Yeah, it's scary to be more vulnerable at times, isn't it? Rather than putting on that persona of the manager behind the clipboard who's just sorting things out. Yeah, but drop my mic there. Let's rescue that. But in the moment, that you really felt the gravity of the situation and felt what it was like to be there, trying to provide good care, but struggling. That's definitely a real bonding experience.
Yeah, I never wanted anyone that I recognised as my granny to be in that situation. And I think many in healthcare, that's what they come up against every day.
Yeah, sometimes we talk about this sort of moral injury that happens to staff, doesn't it? When we know, on one hand, what we've been taught, what we are able to provide under good circumstances, and then the disconnect between what sometimes we are forced to do when situations are difficult and the demand outstretches the capacity. So in terms of helping with these really challenging problems, some sort of called wicked problems, aren't they? Because it's not just one part of our system or one part of the process that can be fixed. Where does coaching fit into this? How can coaching help in this sort of process?
I think if I was to boil it down to one sentence, so coaching, first working specifically with the person that is in that situation. So whether that's the QI facilitator or the clinical admin frontline team that you're working with, we all grow up with a set of beliefs about ourselves, our capabilities, where we fit, what we deserve. And when we can get to the bottom of those and enable people to show up, that term, you hear the term as their best selves, but enable people to show up as they want to show up and believe they can. I think coaching really gets to the heart of that. And then there's another part. So I'm a kata coach, and kata is a form of improvement coaching that I'm guessing some of you will have heard of, and it's part of the lean methodology, although it was never taught when I learnt my lean stuff. And Kata basically provides a way for every single one of us to coach ourselves on the job. But as leaders, it gives a workplace conversation that you can have for continuous improvement to be embedded into the day job. So I see it as kind of two strands. There's the person, there's coaching around process, and then there's the wider stuff, so we've all been involved in QI projects, whether you've got a PID or a project concept or an A3 document. There's the coaching around just making improvement happen. But I see them all as different sides of the same coin. When you go in and you coach tools alone, and I have to say, I hold my hands up and I do apologise. The early 2000s, when we all got really excited about tools this didn't understand the other bit. If you do that alone, you lose people. And the NHS is an organisation. Organisations are people. So working with the person, you can get anything done.
Yes, but if you just give them a set of tools, then you don't necessarily give them the ability to implement the tools or to cope through setbacks. There's a lot around, how is the change delivered? And it's humans trying to encourage the change along, as well as humans who are experiencing it. I'm just thinking of a team I've interacted recently up in the north who had a fantastic QI project go, and they're really enthusiastic about it. I think it was fairly simple, using PDSA cycles. They made some changes, and then a member of staff goes off sick. They lose maybe the support of the QI team because the specific project is over, and it all sorts of starts to fall apart. And hopefully it will improve again in the future, but without that help to the individuals, that coaching support to enable them to weather the ups and downs and the challenges, it's a lot more questionable how sustainable those changes are going to be. And I think that the human side of it, the coaching, must really help with making changes sustainable.
Absolutely. Now, the real practical side of that is something we'll have all done up front. The idea of who's your customer, what are truly their needs, and what are their fears, what do they not want to see. And so a very technical exercise of understanding your customer and your customer needs is actually a foundation to what's often, I've heard it described as the fluffy stuff, but the people stuff, which
so mean.
I know. It's that people stuff. That's the hard bit. That's the bit to crack.
Much easier to make.
Help.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, much easier to make your nice diagram sitting by yourself at your laptop and put in all the processes and be like, here we are. But actually, the human side of it, the interacting with people, the coping with criticism, is much, much trickier. So, Anne, you mentioned that you're trained in the Kata approach for coaching. Are you able to tell us a bit more about that and how that works?
Okay, so Kata, for those of you that haven't heard of it, a guy called Mike Rother, so he's a researcher at the University of Michigan, and in 2007, 2008, as part of his research, he said, right, we've got all these tools out of Toyota. We've all seen the lean wave sweep the world. But why are they not having an impact in the West? And why are they not having an impact outside of Toyota? And his research centered around two questions. The first one was, because he knew we had the tools, it's got to be different to the tools. What are the managers in Toyota doing differently? And whatever they are doing differently, how can we translate it into something that other organisations can use? So he set about observing managerial practices. And he was asking the questions, but they were looking at him as if to say, well, really? And so one of the thoughts that he talks about in his book, so he published this in 2009, Toyota Kata, was that it is so ingrained, it's just what people do. So Kata, this idea of daily practice, those of you that are, practice martial arts, you'll know this idea of practicing and honing and practicing until you get to the standard that you want to be. And Kata then became a framework through which to work by. And you start as a learner, and by the time I started as a learner, I had 20 years QI experience. This was like nothing I'd ever known. This challenged everything that I thought I knew. And then, because it is a structured routine, and I'll tell you the steps in a moment, then you progress to being able to coach the actual routine. So it's a bit like doing the steps as a paso doble on Strictly. There's a certain way to do them, you follow them, and then when you get them perfect, Crave Reg Hall tells you you're really good. You get a good score. So Kata is a routine. And the first question, which we all know, is, what's your challenge? So what are you actually trying to achieve? And I don't know about you, Joe, but I've been into many rooms, and when I ask teams what they're trying to achieve, there's an awkward pause, or there's differing opinions across. So the first thing is clarifying that. And that's always connected to a strategic goal. So a bigger picture goal. And where are we now? So we're all familiar with that. And then this idea of setting, and the word is unfortunate given our experience in the NHS, this idea of a target condition. But a target condition is, in 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time, how are we going to be working? And that way of working, what's the outcome going to be? So what are going to be the results?
So and then sorry, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, is that more about the process, how they're going to be working, or is that a specific target at that point? Like, we want to be, I don't know, discharging 2 more people a day or something like that?
It's both. So it's target conditions. So basically it's a working pattern. What else do we need to make that working pattern operate well? So what do we think it's going to be? What's our process metric and what's our outcome metric?
Yeah, so both of them together.
All together, both together. And then it's PDSA and experimentation that allows people to get there. And as a manager, ideally, you coach every day, no more than 10-15 minutes. Small experiments. So I've coached experiments that were 5 minutes long.
Oh, right, little tiny micro experiments,
Tiny micro experiments. But when you add them all up, you make a difference. And because you're continually focused in a direction, everyone knows where they're going. And the interesting bit is, because you're problem solving yourself as the learner, what I have noticed over the years, the tools become less important. because you find a way, often, you know, that would be based on tools that we would recognise, but people find their own way.
Yeah. So it's enabling people to find the ways of working that works in their situation, rather than it being a set process or steps that they exactly have to follow. But it sounds a bit like, as the coach, you are holding that space and giving them the structure around, well, every day we're going to spend this 10-15 minutes, this is our focus, this is our North Star, what we're aiming towards, but allowing some freedom and adaptability in how you get there.
Yeah, and the true magic happens. So the coaching questions are set. So what's your challenge? What's your target condition? What's your actual condition now? So your current condition. But what did you do as your last step? What did you expect? What happened? And the difference between what you expected and what happened is what you learnt. So what's in your way currently? And, you know, what's your next experiment going to be? So when you start, so when I started, it was like, oh gosh, there's so many questions and I've got to read this off the card. And then you learn very quickly. So you get to grips with that. And then it's all that personal coaching that comes in. So how do you create the safe space? How do you see what is holding somebody back, and how do you enable them to get through that? You know, if somebody is held back because they don't know the answer or they don't know how to relate to another team, it can be really scary to go and talk to another manager or someone that they feel is more senior than them, or to have to admit that they don't know. And that's really where the magic happens. So you're releasing people to have the technical and the personal skills to solve the problems around them.
It's really giving me echoes of coaching for health behaviours as well. So it strikes me that this sort of approach and methodology for people in healthcare is actually, it's very similar to what we have been trained to do with our patients. What's your problem? Exactly what can you do at the moment? What can you not do? Where would you like to be? If you did nothing, how do you think things would go? What do you think you could change? And then when they come back in a couple of weeks later, so are we where we expected, or not? And what's happened in the middle? But applying that to the work of improvement in that very structured way. Yeah, I think this is partly why healthcare people are quite enthusiastic about QI and the tools, because we have, it echoes part of our training and learning, but it's a way of being able to apply it to solve some of the system difficulties as well.
Yeah. And if people, I think, so there's a little bit, and I can share all the details of this.
That'd be great.
So those questions, you know, what is your next step? And there's an experimenting record to record all of these. What is your next step? We often don't ask, what do you expect? So what do you expect to happen as a result of taking that? I will always take that to, okay, how do you expect to feel? What do you expect will be the barriers for you? What do you expect to go well? What do you expect might be tricky? So you can start to coach around some of those to set people up to do the best that they can. And then they go off and they do it, and you come back the next day and you're getting to, okay, what actually happened? And what did you learn? Because it's small change and small steps. One, it takes the fear out of it. But two, you don't make big mistakes. So I remember in my cardiac days doing some work around interpretation of ECGs in A&E.
Okay.
Obviously, the solution was that we needed more ECG machines.
Yep.
So, bought lots of ECG machines. Well, that wasn't the problem at all. The problem was somebody to interpret the ECGs. But because we just didn't know how to be so systematic, we actually delayed. So by the time you'd got those machines, it wasn't that long in those days actually, but you'd spent the money, the experiment was too big, and we'd learned that wasn't the problem. We could have been much swifter, much more efficient in getting to the same answer.
Yeah, I like the idea of just small mistakes. It feels far less daunting, doesn't it, to carry out little pilots, little experiments, see what the effects are, and then scale up, rather than making things that then, or setting a course that's much harder to change. If it's small incremental changes along the way, that is much more achievable. So when you've been doing this work with teams and with individuals, what sort of barriers have you come across, and how have you managed those?
Oh, do you know what the barriers can be? They can be so many, can't they? And situational. There is the elephant in the room that often doesn't get spoken about, that will get ignored. The big strategic policy barriers. You know, sometimes those rules are real, sometimes the rules are assumed. So there's that. There will be, resource can always be an issue, but that whole thing about breaking stuff down, making it small, getting some results with little investment, you give yourself a better chance to get to where you want to be. Change fatigue. You know, just sick of it. You know, it's enough to keep the show on the road, let alone trying to do anything else. And the big one, the massive one for me, which is where my coaching on a one-to-one often focuses now, is what are the personal beliefs, the barriers, just that inside. What's the imposter saying inside? And I genuinely believe if we can help people overcome that, you know, when imposter syndrome steps up, that belief that we're not good enough, we can't do this, we don't fit, we don't know enough, people start to pretend. So my classic is I become a people pleaser. So I think I've got to please everyone, because actually I'm being triggered. I've got to be a perfectionist, so it's got to be perfect. It doesn't. Some people will bully.
Oh, okay.
And criticize others. Many people will just go into a corner and give themselves the most negative dose of self-criticism you can imagine. Whereas if you can turn off the triggers that result in those things, I think the world is a better place, one, for us as individuals, but for the teams that we work in as well.
Yeah, it sounds like those are the real foundations to build on. Understanding people's backgrounds, understanding, their thoughts and their beliefs, to be able to change them, or for people, if they want to be able to change them, but to be able to work together. Yeah, because if someone's just spiraling in that whole negative imposter syndrome, then they're not going to be in a place to work well with other people, or to be able to make improvements at all. Yeah. Are you able to share any examples of when you've been coaching and practice and the impact of that?
Often people will come to me because they feel overwhelmed and burnt out. One, either both. And when you start to strip back, so people feel burnt out, they feel overwhelmed because they're taking on too much. Their work isn't giving them purpose, but they can't find a way to leave or change it so that it does. And when you start to strip back, you realise that type of behaviour, so take the perfectionist and the people pleaser, which are my set of behaviours of choice, they were learned very early in life. And when people can see that where they were learnt, what we do is we write a story. So my people pleasing thing started when I think I was about 6. So this is where I remember
very
it started.
Young.
Very young. And I'd been shopping. I was one of 4 children. I was the eldest. I was always the goody two-shoes. And my brother had got a red cagoule. You know, like the Rain Mac?
Yeah, very smart.
Oh my goodness. To say that I wanted that red cagoule is an understatement. So, like any 6-year-old would, I kicked off in the shop. And my dad was appalled. And got home, I got the telling off. And I think in that moment, I decided that I had to please everybody else, because when I didn't please them, my dad kicked off, people got upset, and I didn't get a cagoule either, on top of, the moral insult. And all through my life, I'd grown up trying to please, which meant I took on too much work. I didn't confront conflict when I should have confronted it. I didn't go in as hard as I could have done, and I mean hard. I could have been much more impactful if I hadn't been afraid of what people thought of me. So learning that I'd written a script with the wisdom of a 6-year-old and was still telling the story as a 40-year-old, even 50-year-old, was a big ha-ha moment. And the people that I coach, when they realise where their stories are coming from, they can talk to that 6-year-old with the wisdom of their grown-up self. So the story gets broken. And the way that people show up. And there's one lady that I've been working with. She was afraid to go for promotion. She was afraid to say no. Overworked, overwhelmed. Who, in understanding where her story was coming from, she's been promoted twice. Her salary increase has been phenomenal. She's lost 3.5 stone the last time that I spoke to her. And she isn't overwhelmed because she's learnt to delegate. She delegates, the phrase was, I want to learn to delegate like a boss. Well, she delegates to her boss now.
Great.
And she's got time to look after herself, her health and her well-being, and do incredible stuff at work.
Yeah.
So that's where it makes a difference.
Yeah, and that's not just in one area of someone's life, that's throughout all of it, isn't it? So I don't think we can fully separate our work selves from our home selves. It's like you say, if you're overwhelmed and undervalued at work, then you as well don't have maybe the headspace or literally just the time to look after yourselves and eat healthily and things like that. That is a huge impact that probably came off the back of, I'm feeling scared of maybe just going for promotions. But it sounds like when you unpicked it, there were so many different things going on there.
Yeah, and for women, I'm scared of going for promotion. I'm scared of asking for what I want. I'm scared of or a little nervous about asking for what I need at home. So actually I do need to go to bed at 9 o'clock. I need to exercise twice a week. And somebody that I was talking to about 2 weeks ago, I can't eat at 10 p.m. at night. I have to have my dinner at 6 o'clock or I don't sleep. But to be able to say that at home and risk rejection was a big deal. So you're right, it does impact all of our lives.
Well, speaking as another eldest daughter who will just, any groups of people around me, I will suddenly start picking them up and looking after them because I'm used to just carrying a crowd along with me. Yeah, there's definitely some interesting childhood things that I've learned that can stay with you throughout life. Absolutely. So I just have, going back to the sort of more healthcare aspect of things, if we were to drop you into an organisation that was having problems with maybe flow. Sometimes hospitals struggle to discharge patients, don't they? And then they can't admit patients because they don't have capacity. So how would you approach that with a coaching mindset? What would be your approach to those teams there to help them with that?
I have never met a team that don't know what to do.
Oh, interesting.
Everybody knows what to do, what needs to be done, and they often know the way to do it. So I would start to go in and ask them, understand what the problem is from their perspective, but what's getting in the way, what's stopping them. And then through the framework of where we need to get to, working through each of those problems. You know, the story you told at the beginning, Jo, about the A&E team, they knew what they had to do, but they just did not have the headspace to do it. So one of the practical things was in the way. They're looking for stuff. You know, having to leave an area, go somewhere else, meet somebody on the way, have to have a conversation and solve another problem, and then what you want not being there. So really solve some of those problems. And because they're simple might be the wrong word here, but they're straightforward to solve.
Yeah, they're not big IT infrastructure sort of problems, are they? No. People get a sense of achievement, and when you learn you can solve a problem like that and believe you can solve that problem, you can gradually get to big ones. So I would go in and understand. Often there's a lot in the relationships. So I remember working with an acute medical team, and there was this real power dynamics where people just didn't talk to each other. They just did not have relationships around trust. So a lot of the work that I've done, I'm a trust in work practitioner, is enabling people to develop trust in themselves as teams. So I would do a lot of that work along with the strategic stuff of raising problems and enabling leaders particularly to take ownership of them and to solve them, not to rescue, but to be able to solve some of the bigger problems outside of the clinical team that are going to make all of the difference. So I'd be working on lots of different levels. That sounds like you've really summed up almost there, that stakeholder awareness. Who's got the say-so, who's got the power in all of the different layers of the resulting problem that we've got there on the ground. And yeah, relationships, absolutely key there, aren't they?
Yeah, and many finance teams. So something that I have seen is, when you'll get a cost improvement program and you're looking across a whole pathway, and, if you put a blanket, right, we've got to save 20% at each point, but you take 20% off the physio team, who are absolutely
never happen.
who are the gatekeepers of discharge, or whoever is the gatekeeper of the point in that process with the most demand. The finance team may not necessarily see that. So being able to show that and demonstrate it, to take people to the shop floor, because that's scary. And I actually give them the kata questions, but reframe them for that idea of being on the shop floor, because you can't solve every problem.
No.
But you have to solve the important ones.
Absolutely. So as we're coming towards the end of this, I was wondering if you've got any advice if people are listening to this and they're thinking, oh, yes, coaching skills. This is maybe what I'm missing as part of my, I don't know, not personality, part of my skill set in quality improvement. If they feel like being able to coach and coach more effectively would be useful, what advice or signposting would you give someone starting off on this journey?
So I think available to the NHS, ILM5 and ILM7 seem to be readily available. I am a one of many coach. So one of many is a specialist women's coaching qualifications. And there are so many women, particularly across the southwest, that are trained one of many coaches. A lot of medical staff, quite a few nursing staff have that coaching qualification. So it's worth seeking somebody out. Or if you want to have a chat to me, I'm quite happy to. I'm also a Procedure 360 coach. What I would say, if you're new to coaching, find a coaching course that teaches you how to coach.
Okay.
Not just the theory and the technical stuff behind it. So ILM5 is brilliant. ILM7 is really, really good. So ILM7 is master's level. So you might want to think about the time you've got available, the level that you would work at, because you don't get 2 shots. So it might be too much to get support for a 5 and a 7. My view when I was doing it, and the advice that I tend to give to people, is if you think you can, go for ILM7.
It's interesting what you say about training that teaches you how to coach, because whenever I talk about QI training, I really encourage people to think about courses which it's not just being taught the tools, but then you're supported to carry out a project, and then you need to come back and present your project, because the process of doing is very important as well as the theory of it. Thanks.
Yeah,
that's
you
really
don't
useful.
Learn to drive from the highway code.
Oh, got to be doing it.
QI is the same.
Very, very much so. So finally, Anne, if listeners would like to get in touch with you, because you work independently providing coaching, you're saying both one-to-one and to teams, what's the best way to get in touch with you, and what's your current offering at the moment?
My website is annehillcoaching.com, and LinkedIn is a great way. I post every day on LinkedIn.
We love LinkedIn.
And we could share those details after. So I'm Anne Hill Coach on LinkedIn. I've got an Instagram profile. I've got a Facebook profile. So I'm getting better at that. So I'm having to apply my QI skills to keep posting there. My I just really want to share the value of coaching. So you will find that I just give away loads of stuff, loads of templates, loads of tools. I'm doing a webinar next week on procrastination, which we can share. And I will do that. Actually, I will continue to do that because I know that it's important. And I offer one-to-one coaching, mainly women, typically late 30s onwards. I do the going back, so it's called Stop Being Stuck. I offer the one of many program, and then I've got a very, very focused executive mentoring coaching offer. And in group coaching, groups will come to me. So I do some work around trust. I do some work around menopause at work. Honestly, we all need to know the data.
We do,
particularly in healthcare, where a lot of us are women. Well, 10% of women will leave their jobs purely through perimenopause. So
that's huge.
We all need to, it's absolutely huge.
And if it's not us, then we're managing people or working with people who are going through the menopause. So we all need to be aware.
Absolutely. And there's some practical things as managers we can all do and should be doing. And there's some great guidance to support that as well. So yeah, my email is annehill@annehillcoaching.com. That's the best way, and we can share.
Yeah, we'll put it all in the show notes. Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much for joining me today, Anne. I just love this conversation. Feel like I've got so much to take away and so much to slowly reflect about and think about how I can bring into my practice as well.
Thank you for having me, Jo. It's just been a pleasure. Thank you.